Hi, everyone. I am incredibly excited to welcome you to today's video where we have a very special guest with us. He is the Director of Outreach and Business Development at the Virginia Tech University Helmet Lab. And as we'll soon see, this is one of, if not the leading institutions in helmet safety research across the world. Our guest has a PhD in biomechanics, and previous to his role at the Helmet Lab, he served as a reviewer for several biomechanics journals and recreational sports journals. He is none other than Dr. Barry Miller. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, for being here with us today.
Well, that was quite the introduction. Thank you. And happy to be here and share what we do.
Absolutely. I'm super, super excited. Before we get into why the Virginia Tech Lab is so special, to kick things off, would you be able to give a little bit of your background and how you found your passion in brain injury prevention and helmet research?
Sure. I was a college athlete. I played baseball in college. And at that point in time, I was a kinesiology, exercise science major. And I had a sports biomechanics professor that was found. And that kind of launched my, interest in biomechanics. Everything you do, sport biomechanics is how efficient can you be, bigger, stronger, faster, but you need the mechanics to go with it, etc. And so I ended up getting my PhD in sport biomechanics. And I worked in exercise science. I was obviously assistant professor at various institutions. Also did some administrative roles. But I met Dr. Duma, one of the founders of the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab. He happened to be a personal friend because our kids played basketball together. At the time, I was not working at Virginia Tech, and I didn't know what he did. And then, lo and behold, we were a good fit. And so he wanted a business guy with a biomechanics degree, and just so you guys know, injury biomechanics and sport biomechanics, basically what biomechanics does is we slow down time so we can measure things, whether it's high-speed video, using sensors like accelerometers and helmets, force plates, EMG, all that kind of stuff we use to slow down time so we can measure things and figure things out. So the fields are, almost the same. It's just, what are we using the information for? Injury prevention or sport performance? So yeah, that's how. Yeah, it's been a great fit. I've been here 7 years now, and yeah, the Helmet Lab's really cool. We do some awesome stuff, and the founders are excellent researchers.
Fantastic. That's a really, really cool and interesting path how you got there. And actually, on that note, could you tell us a little bit about the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab and what you do there and why it's so special?
So the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab is a comprehensive injury biomechanics lab. So we have our roots in auto safety, as in most injury biomechanics labs. Auto safety's been around a long, long time. They have lots of funding to figure things out. And, car crashes are pretty horrific, and that's a great segment into preventing injuries is make cars safer. So we were trying to study concussions and brain injuries, and the idea for putting sensors in helmets came from the equipment room down in athletics. Can you help us pick a safer helmet? And Dr. Duma says, well, as a matter of fact, if we could quantify, what happens, obviously we want to slow down the head as best as possible. We don't want these rapid head movements, right? Faster your head moves or any body part, the risk of injury goes up, right? If we can decrease the forces, decrease these accelerations, we decrease risk. And so we started putting sensors in football player helmets. And luckily, Virginia Tech football players volunteered to be subjects. We started collecting data. And so we collected data. Every head impact was recorded. And when there was a concussion on the field, we really paired that with what the helmet data tells us. And then that became a risk function for everything we do.
Very cool. Could you tell us a little bit about that risk function, as you mentioned, and how you really are able to quantify helmet helmet impacts and injuries?
Sure. So we have a bivariate risk function. So it's both linear acceleration and rotation acceleration, equally weighted for the most part. And as when we test the helmet and we compare it to others, the helmet that better reduces those head accelerations for given impact scenarios should get rated better, right? So same thing with automobiles, right? If you crashed a car at 50 miles an hour, two different cars, the one that had the least acceleration to the driver would be safer, right, for that given scenario. same things kind of applied here. So that's how the rating system came out. So we have over 2 million data points now. So 2 million head impacts, not that they were 2 million concussions, but 2 million head impacts. And we really figured out, when these numbers get to certain levels, like 120 Gs of linear acceleration and maybe over 5,000 radians per second squared of rotation acceleration, your risk of concussion really starts to ramp up. Not that you couldn't get, you could get concussed at, 50 Gs of linear acceleration. Not probable, but it does happen, based on your personal background and things like that. Everyone's a little different, right? A lot of variation in concussion risk among people.
For sure, for sure. Um, and that's actually something I wanted to kind of ask. You talked about kind of slowing down the process of an impact and increasing the deceleration time. So, do you what how do the machines in the lab sort of, I know that you may not be able to give some of that information away, but on a general note, how do some of your machines work to test that?
So we use primarily the NOXI head form. NOXI is the National Operating Committee for the Standards of Athletic Equipment. They designed a head form specifically for sport helmets. And inside that head form, there's an accelerometer array. And if you go to any of our methodology papers under technical documents on our webpage, you'll see the full scope of what that sensor package is, how we filter the data, et cetera. But basically that collects data. It collects linear and rotational head kinematic data. And then obviously when we process that, we can grab the peaks, and the peak values for those two metrics are what go into our risk function, and then assess how well the helmet actually did at absorbing energy.
Very interesting. And so I actually had this question kind of based off this what we're talking about. I saw a video I think the other day where they were showing, it was actually an advertisement where a guy was he took a hammer actually and he hit it on the top of one helmet and the helmet stayed completely intact, and then the other helmet it broke. So one thing that I've been thinking about is the helmet that breaks would actually be more protective in most instances, right? Because it's actually sort of serving as that crush zone kind of thing.
Kind of depends. So you have multi-use helmets like football, ice hockey, where
Hmm.
you get repeated head impacts in a given play or a given season, right? Then you have single impact helmets like bike helmets, snow sport helmets, equestrian helmets. The difference is, you don't plan on wrecking on your bike, right? So those helmets can be lightweight. They don't need to be 5 pounds like a football helmet. They're probably like a
Yeah.
half a pound.
Hmm.
But they're designed to deform on impact, crack, crush, crumble, break. That's how they absorb energy. So it's just a different way of absorbing energy. So it kind of depends on, if the head form inside your given scenario, if we could measure that, that would be the ultimate way to determine which helmet was safer for that given impact scenario, right? A sledgehammer at, I don't know, whatever velocity, and then you compare the two. But we'd have to allow the head to move. So just because the helmet didn't crack, crush, or break, yeah, it's hard to say. But they're just different applications. So most sports are single impact helmets.
Understood. Understood. Single
Right.
impact meaning that they once they break, you can't reuse it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it'd have to have significant deformation to not be able to be used again because you'd have to hit the exact same spot again for it not to
Mm,
protect. But when in doubt, obviously replace your helmet if you've noticed a huge crack or things like that. But
got it.
it takes
Okay.
a decent amount of energy to crack those or break those. So, and those helmets are really good for the high energy impacts, which makes sense. But they
Mm,
tend not to be as good for the lower energy impacts where concussions are more common because they just don't have the energy to deform, right? So just different
understood.
different material characteristics, and they keep developing. The helmets keep getting better and better, so they're starting to
Mhm.
layer the helmets with different materials to accommodate different energies um, for a given impact or a given impacts, I should say. So
Very cool. Um, before we move on to sort of the next part and talk about like what different things the Virginia Tech Lab tests, I had one more quick question on this topic, which is could you describe a little bit of the differences in terms of, I know it's very varied from helmet to helmet, but differences in the materials that they use within the shell in single use versus repeated use helmets and how those work?
Yeah, for single impact helmets, you typically see expanded polystyrene, kind of like styrofoam. So,
Hmm.
once it breaks, it breaks, it doesn't go back together. Then EPP is a little bit, and vinyl nitrile, those materials typically can absorb impact after impact. They don't permanently deform. They deform with an impact, but then they go back to their original shape, right? So,
Hmm.
and there's other materials, all kind of these lattice structures that are more rubbery. So there's tons of these types of materials, 3D printed even, so they're becoming more common. They can act like shock absorbers without permanent deformation. So
Got it. And why don't we use the EPP and the vinyl nitrile in the single use?
probably because weight, it's heavier.
Oh, okay,
Heavier.
understood.
I assume it's more expensive, but I don't know that for certain. But yeah, weight. EPS is super light. Everyone's grabbed styrofoam cooler, right? Super
Hmm.
super lightweight, and it does a really good job at absorbing energy as well. It's UV protectant, water resistant, super cheap to make, and so henceforth that's the dominant material used in bike helmets, snow sport helmets, equestrian helmets.
Understood. It's very
Yep.
fascinating. Um, well, the Virginia Tech Lab is, as I understand, the only or the main primary lab across the world that releases helmet ratings. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the star rating system is a patented process. So where we figure out how do you hit your head playing that given sport or in that activity, we come back to the lab and design test rigs and design test protocols to best evaluate impacts using those scenarios. So we test the helmets against that specific criteria. So we go a step further than the certifications, which are pass or fail, and they only use linear acceleration. And just so your listeners know, the threshold to pass these certifications is the point of catastrophic head injury. So we're talking skull fracture and death, which is really important, which means if I wear a bike helmet that's certified, I should not get a skull fracture or die in your typical bike accident, right? So that's first and primary. Like you gotta survive. And then the next step to protection, so the helmet maybe it does that. Then the next level of protection is can we also enhance the helmet so it reduces concussion risk, which usually is the more milder or lower energy impacts. And so it's a challenge, obviously, but the helmets continue to improve, and you start to see different layering of padding densities, thicknesses, and materials to accomplish that.
Understood. So the 5-star helmets are going to be those that are usually far past that certification threshold and are going to be give you a much higher chance of preventing concussion or brain injury.
That's correct. So yeah, so we rank order them based on performance as relates to concussion risk. That's correct. So and we have 9 different sports right now: varsity football, youth football, flag football, soccer, snow sports, whitewater sports, ice hockey, cycling, and getting ready to come out with safety helmets slash hard hats, rugby. Those are the next ones on the list. So yeah, we keep building.
Well, that's incredible how widespread the work of the Virginia Tech Lab is. And and that was actually going to be my next question is what kind of different sports headgear does the Virginia Tech Lab test? So it looks like it's super varied and you guys kind of hit really all of the sports. I also seen that you started testing some of those bands that they wear across the heads for flag football and soccer. Is that right?
Yeah, so we call that soft headgear. So sports
Okay.
like rugby, flag football, soccer, they don't use hard shells because that could be injurious because everyone doesn't have to wear helmets, right? If
Hmm.
helmets were mandatory, it'd be a little different. But when they're not, you can't have one person wearing a football helmet and you not, right? That would not be good. So yeah,
Yeah.
we call that soft headgear. And so yeah, they're starting to use the headband style or the full headgear. And just like any other product out there, there's a big difference in some of the padding materials. So that, and I always say the density and thickness of the padding material is primarily what drives impact performance. And so, and then, obviously there's different layering of different material structures and geometries might make a difference. Um, yeah, so you're going to see they're starting to mandate a lot of these soft headgear in youth sports. Female sports are starting to mandate it for female soccer players, which is all good. A little bit of padding goes a long way. Everyone can probably agree they bumped heads with somebody on accident. Skull to skull does not feel very good. And it's amazing what a little bit of padding does, especially if both players have to wear it.
For sure. And I know I've actually been seen some articles on like different complaints about, how it affects the play of the sport, and especially in soccer where headers aren't as easy. But I think the safety probably far outweighs some of the effects that it can have on the sport. Um,
I agree.
but-
Some of the headbands actually have a little bit thinner padding right on the forehead where you would head a ball.
mhm.
Because most of the head impacts, you usually don't collide with somebody face to face, right?
Yeah,
Usually when you turn your head. So the point where you're actually heading a ball is probably not as frequent as what you think, right? As
yeah,
far as the other impacts. You always want to turn your head and avoid that. So back of your head's pretty common to get a concussion, you trip, fall, or side of your head. And so I think there's sometimes more density in those locations than the front, just so you can continue to head a ball like you would in soccer. But I don't think the padding makes that much difference in the big scheme, like as you pointed to.
for sure. Um, Fantastic. Another thing I would love to ask you about is the Virginia Tech, the special helmets that Virginia Tech has with the sensors inside. But could you talk a little bit about those and how you use them um, to get real data from games and improve helmet safety?
Yeah, so that system was called the HIT system, the head impact telemetry system. We don't use that anymore. We've already collected plenty of data and our risk curve hasn't changed. But basically that array of accelerometers, so that padding material, the red dots that your viewers are probably seeing, those sit right next to your skull and they act as a surrogate to what we think would happen inside your skull. I mean, the best way to measure is put sensors inside the skull, but no one's going to allow us to do that, right? It'd be a little unethical. So we have to do the next best thing is capture your skull movements in general. And so every impact that it's recorded in real time. So we're recording both linear and rotational head kinematics. Every practice, every game, every play, that's constantly recorded. And then we, collected that data. And then, when we did have a concussion on the field, that was, obviously kind of a red dot. And we compared that to all the other dots and then figured out, oh, it tends to, when you get over 120 Gs, the concussion risk really starts to go up. And so that built the concussion risk curve that we have.
Understood. Um, So, based on the data that you found from the hit system as well as all your testing in within helmets, what are your thoughts in general on how effective helmets really are in protecting athletes from brain injury?
Helmets have drastically improved. In fact, we just rescaled 2 weeks ago. So what was considered a 5-star 2 weeks ago may not be considered a 5-star today, because over the last, we rescaled in 2018, but now, before we rescaled, I mean, there was just way too many. For bike helmets, for example, there was 167 out of the 272 helmets that were 5-star. Well, that doesn't differentiate anymore, does it? Because all the helmets have gotten so good. So we rescaled, and now there's only 38 helmets that get the 5-star ranking. So the important thing to note is, the helmet performance didn't change, just the thresholds we're using to put them in the bins, the 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, etc. So, and that's a reflection of the helmet market, the companies. The helmets keep getting better and better and safer, and they're using our blueprint because they use our test protocol to improve the helmets because they reflect real world accident scenarios. And so we're seeing, great improvements. So we rescaled bike, youth football, and varsity football just 2 weeks ago.
Very cool. So, as standards or as helmets get more effective, the standards in the helmet lab also getting higher and higher to reach
Yeah.
that 5-star.
Yep, a little more stringent, right? So we don't want
Mhm.
dilution. We want to showcase the best of the best. Yeah, best in
Yeah.
class 5-star, right? So it was
Mhm.
time to rescale. Everyone agreed. Yeah, it was time. Probably past due, but we got it done.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Can I also ask, what different impacts you test in the lab? Like, do you test helmet to helmet contacts or direct like um force into the helmet, like from a side or crown position?
Yeah, so we have a couple different types of test rigs. We have a head-to-head system where we collide two bare Noxie head forms together, and then we compare those to like one with soft headgear on it. How much did the soft headgear reduce those accelerations? We use that type of test rig. Um, we can test, helmeted to helmeted. It just depends on what we're doing and for the research versus the official star ratings. So it depends on the sport. They're all a little different, but football, ice hockey, equestrian, usually we have an impactor face that represents, like for football, we use a mushroom-shaped impactor face that represents a football helmet. So we don't necessarily need to put another football helmet on there. Um, Equestrian, we have a flat nylon, and we also test on an oblique test. So it just depends on the sport for the most part. Um, and we have a shell add-on report if you viewers are interested in the Guardian caps. And so we did
For
every
sure.
configuration possible. Helmet to helmet, helmet to Guardian cap to Guardian cap, Guardian cap to safer shell add-on. So a wide variety of different scenarios to figure out what does it look like if everyone's wearing these things or one of these things, what does it look like? So that's a good question.
Very cool. It's actually really, really fascinating how you've been able to vary it by sport. Actually, on that note, could you talk a little bit about the effectiveness of the Guardian cap? Because that's something that I think a lot of people are wondering about.
So if you think about helmet performance or any performance of a product, the best performing product probably won't be augmented as much by some sort of additional item, right? That kind of makes sense. Same is true here. So the high performing football helmets can get augmented with a little bit with the Guardian cap or the safer sport helmet shell add-on or the Guardian NXT, which is the NFL version. So they can all increase performance a little bit. The average helmet or the poor performing helmet will get a bigger boost by using a shell add-on, right? Because the padding materials to start with probably aren't that good in these average helmets or poor performing helmets. So basically pick the safest helmet you can, and then if you'd like to augment with a Guardian cap or safer sport shell add-on, then you could do so and get maybe, I don't know, I think our report says 5 to 7% maybe for the top performing helmets, and you'll get a little bit better performance or augmentation with the average helmet. So it's called the Shell Add-on Report. It's on our webpage, vt.edu/helmet, and then there's a pull-down menu, or just Google Virginia Tech helmet ratings.
Fantastic. So that's actually good to know then that the Guardian cap does have some efficacy, even at the highest level where it might not be as much because those helmets intrinsically have a lot of effectiveness, but
That's correct. Yep.
still does help. Another one that I would love to ask about is the Q collar. Have you heard about that where it goes around the neck and then in a contact kind of forces blood up to mimic the physiology of a bighorn sheep?
We have not tested that, but I know our medical team in athletics does not allow our football players to wear that. So,
Oh,
when you increase pressure to your skull, if you had some sort of micro bleed in your head, that would not be a good thing to increase pressure, right? So, our players are not allowed to wear that, as far as I know. Um, so, in concept, it might be helpful. I don't know. In the real world, it's hard to say. Um,
hmm.
Increasing pressure and blood volume to your head. I understand the physics behind it may be helpful, but I don't know in practical terms if that's a risk you want to take. You don't necessarily want to increase blood pressure in any part of the body, right? So
Yeah. So sort of like the idea that it would lock the brain in sort of thing because of the pressure is outweighed by the risk factors that may happen.
perhaps, yeah, you're just solidifying the whole system in your head, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know, tons about that. Um, I just know
Yeah.
our medical team doesn't. doesn't allow as far as I know. So yeah.
Got it. Got it. Um, so I have also been looking at the some of the five-star helmets across sports, and one that really stuck out to me was the top helmet listed on the site for football, which I believe now, I mean, about a year ago, the top ones used to be Visis and then the Riddell Speed Flex. But I see now that the Light Apache, I believe, has come up to the top. And I read about it a little bit, and it seems like it's a very light but protective helmet. Could you talk a little bit about um, how that helmet works?
Yeah, that is the new number one. So the company is Light Helmets, and their partner that makes the padding materials is a company called Collide with a K, Kollide. And so I believe a good portion of that helmet's 3D printed. So a lot of technology, a lot of physics applied. And yeah, they've created a pretty light and well-performing helmet. So we'll see how it holds up in the real world. But currently, it's the number one tested helmet we've had.
Very interesting. Do you know what kind of protective things it has inside? Like, does it have the honeycomb structure, potentially like the deformable columns that we saw in the Vices 01 and 02?
Yeah, it's somewhat like that. They're almost like a bunch of independent shock absorbers, and each one kind of looks like a lattice structure inside there. I didn't cut them in half, or we didn't look inside, but yeah, some sort of lattice or honeycomb structure. Seems like what they're made out of, or the geometry of them. And then I don't know exactly what the materials they used. Uh, it's again, I think most of it was 3D printed, so I'm not sure you know what the specs are on that material.
Understood. Understood. Well, that's super cool, and definitely gonna look a little bit more into that helmet because they were kind of able to balance the lightness and the protectiveness, which is something that could be groundbreaking in the future.
Right, right. So, and I think the lighter helmets for especially for the younger players makes a lot of sense. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah,
so we'll see. Yep.
for sure. And then last thing, actually, could you give some of your final thoughts on what new developments might be coming up in the field of traumatic brain injury prevention and helmet safety and where the field is really headed in the future?
Yeah, we're starting to see a lot of these 3D printed structures, the geometries, these honeycomb structures. We're starting to see a little bit more layering of different material types. Um, so yeah, if the density and thickness and the geometries of these things are right, we can probably, continue to improve to some point. But I think the bigger challenge is how big are we going to allow the helmets to be? If you have more offset, which really is the space between, your head and the exterior of the helmet. So the more space and the bigger the helmet is, the more space and opportunity you have to absorb energy. But, can you increase the size of a football helmet by 15%, or how functional is that, right? Maybe a bike helmet that's still pretty light but it's bigger. Bigger is probably better, right? More protection in the big scheme, or more opportunity for protection. But there's a practical side too. How big? Yeah, what's practical to wear? How big of a helmet do you want to wear? And how heavy it? I mean, heavier would probably be better too if you could pack it with as much padding material as you want. But maybe comfort and ventilation and price, all those factor in as well.
Definitely. Um, Actually, relating to that, there's a field. I'm not sure if you might be aware of this actually. Additive manufacturing, where they're trying to change the structures on the nanoscale and keep sort of like the tensile, ductile properties at the macro scale, but increase the spacing at the micro scale. So, do you think that might have an effect in the future on making more light helmets that are still very, very protective and have those same properties?
Yeah, it's possible. We don't really know until we actually get it in here and test it in the lab.
Yeah,
You know, there's often a big jump between materials testing, where they're doing some stagnant, flat impact scenarios, and they get it into the geometry of a helmet with a head form, an oxy head form. Well, sometimes it doesn't perform as they thought. So, the geometry and the type of impacts we do can be very different than some of the static loading of materials testing. So, usually takes a few iterations, but we'll see where it goes.
Sounds great. Well, it's fantastic. It's been absolutely amazing to have you here. I know, again, you're super busy this time of year in the summer, working on testing, and so I can't tell you how much I appreciate and how much the viewers will appreciate having you here to talk about the inspiring work the Virginia Tech Lab is doing and share your insights and expertise into this incredibly important field of brain injury prevention and helmet safety.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thanks for hosting. And yeah, if people have questions, I can be found on the Virginia Tech Helmet Lab page, bmiller21@vt.edu. So yeah, I would reference our homepage or our pages before you buy a helmet. It's a good source of information.
Will do. I'll put our links right here. Thank you so much again, Dr. Miller, for coming in today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.